Did you know that there are over 3.2 million podcasts in the world? It seems like everybody these days has a podcast. But did you also know that 90% of those podcasts fail to make it to 20 episodes? There are various reasons for these failures, but one reason is that people don't know what they're doing. Shocking, right? As it turns out, the same reason why people don't operate on themselves also applies to podcast success. You want to talk to someone who has had success launching and marketing podcasts. Somebody like Juliana Barbati. Juliana runs a podcast marketing and production agency, and their team takes care of everything for you, making this process a breeze. All their info is in the show notes. You can go to julianabarbati.com, tell them TGFB sent you, and get a discount when paying in Bitcoin. That's right, Juliana is a Bitcoiner. Her and her husband were actually Bitcoiners before they were Christians. And so it's been great for us to work with them. They basically came to us and said, hey, we'd love to help you guys, help TGFB grow. And so we'd love to kind of apply our services to you guys. So go ahead and support them. If you have a podcast you're working on or one that you'd like to start, go ahead and check them out. Now let's get to today's show. Mills, welcome to the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me, Jordan.
Oh, man. Now, this is our very first time we've ever recorded a podcast together. We've never even thought about recording another podcast.
We've never recorded a probably hour and a half podcast. Was it a year and a half ago? I mean,
it's like a year ago. Mistakes were made, Mills.
No.
Were made.
I for sure remember where I lived when we recorded that.
Oh, no.
And I moved into a different place in December of 22. So for a fact, it was well over
a year. So maybe like a year and 4 or 5 months. That's not quite a year and a half. That sounds nowhere near as bad.
It was probably because I think we first met at the Miami conference.
Yep.
2022.
Yep.
So it was probably a couple months after that.
It must have been we had just founded Thank God for Bitcoin. That was the problem. Is I recorded my interview with you thinking that we were going to be starting the podcast within a few days or something, and it ended up being significantly more than that.
But yeah, mistakes were made. Here we are. I'm really excited. Honestly, someday we can dig it up and watch it and laugh. I'm sure it was great. I'm sure positive it was awesome.
Actually, it wasn't bad. I will say the reason when we're going to throw Mrs. TGFB under the bus here. No, Mrs. TGFB actually pulled the plug. My wife pulled the plug on it. She's like, there's nothing like just like grabbing me about it. So I was like, okay, well, that's how it goes. All right, Mills. So for those of our listeners who maybe have heard of you, but don't know who you are, or maybe have never heard of you before, why don't you give an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I am Mills. I have a brother in the space who lovingly brought me to a meetup back in New York City. And I turned from someone that had Bitcoin and, was convinced to slowly invest small amount because it was crazy. It felt like you're throwing your money away, to kind of leaving my former career and industry and working in the Bitcoin industry. So I went from a very staunch, like, I'm going to be a pleb for life and I'm never going to work in the Bitcoin industry, to working at Bitcoin Magazine for a while and got to do a number of very amazing things there, great opportunities. Cool to be able to contribute to the space. And then, after Bitcoin Magazine, I joined the team at PubKey for a season and have been kind of pulling back a little now and doing a few different projects and working with you guys. But most people, if they do know who I am, maybe they know that my brother is one of the founders of Mutiny, and they're a big fan of that privacy-focused Lightning wallet.
What is your brother's name? Let's just give it. Let's put it
Paul Miller.
Paul Miller. Paul is the man. Again, thoroughly appreciate getting to know him. He has spoken at both of our TGFB conferences, and he actually was the one to birth the orange pill, if we can say that. He delivered the talk about presenting what Bitcoin is and how it works this past year. So we love Paul. We need to have Paul on very soon.
And Paul is actually, I knew back when Paul was living with me in New York, I remember he recorded a podcast with you.
Bingo. Yes.
And so I have known of you. I didn't meet you until Miami, but I definitely, Paul had only lovely things to say. And he was so encouraged. I mean, he had been really finding a lot of sense of community within the Bitcoin host. I've always been kind of reluctant on social media, don't prefer to be on there at all. And so he had found community and camaraderie in the Bitcoin community, and then found it so encouraging that you were a Christian and a Bitcoiner. Yep. And, I think that's something we both share in common as well.
Bingo. Absolutely. Again, your brother is just super encouraging. Both of you guys are encouraging. Again, this is a good and natural thing, right? There's people who are, I think about, there's people different, the difference between a Paul and a Timothy. So the Apostle Paul at the end of the book of Romans says to Timothy, I make it my aim to preach Christ where he's not been named, lest I build on somebody else's foundation. And so Paul's goal is just clearly, I want to go to the people who do not love Jesus, do not know about Jesus, do not worship him. And I want to go share the gospel with them and be light in those places so that people who have never heard can have the opportunity to hear about Jesus. And then there's other people like Timothy. Paul says to Timothy, he sends him to a number of these different churches. So these are already established churches. And so he sends Timothy out to go minister in those places. So clearly not everyone, or Paul didn't believe that everyone needed to be like him. And so my family, my wife and I, we've been missionaries. We enjoy spending time and just like trying to think about how to share the gospel with people who do not know Jesus. And so we're constantly thinking of in a missional and like a share the gospel type way. And how do we think and present these ideas and, just different ideas with people who aren't Christians. And so in you and Paul, with people who, work in the tech space and hopefully we can get into this a little bit, the entertainment industry as well. You guys have worked in these places that aren't exactly known for their humongous percentage of Christians.
That's so diplomatic of you to say.
Yeah. And so you guys have been kindred spirits for me in that way. So I've just really appreciate other people who are similar minded and can be people in the same foxhole, I would say. So
yeah, comrades, oh, hey, you're in the bunker. Yeah,
exactly.
Too.
Yeah, you know how this is. Yeah.
With Bitcoin Magazine, I got the opportunity, speaking of diplomacy, to spend a few weeks covering the Craig Wright and Hodl trial in Norway. So I feel like if people don't know of me from my brother, which that's a very cool way if they did, then Bitcoin Magazine, I got to do some film projects for them and develop some series, Freedom Money with Matt Odell, and a couple, not necessarily one-offs, but more just special projects covering different things.
And so this is what you always thought. You always thought you were going to be front of camera talent. That was a dream of yours, right? That's how that came to be.
Yeah, it's so humbling. We think we know things. Yeah. And so I worked in film and television, never going to work in the Bitcoin industry, but always behind camera. And I have very reluctantly, but like it's been these opportunities that I'm sure a lot of people think are amazing. And I'm like, oh, that is now what I'm doing. And it has been a good load, learning and growing and trusting God in the midst of all of that. Yeah, never dreamt of it. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Yeah. Now, again, we will get into that a little bit. We will not get into some of the other amazing jobs you've done, which you unpacked for me yesterday. Guys, I just want you to know, one of the most incredible things I said to Mills, I was like, you're telling me I can't talk about this in the podcast? She's like, no, we can't. I was like, oh. Well, I just posted details about our upcoming TGFB Patreon. So maybe we can convince Mills to, maybe for the Patreon listeners, we can get her to tell the story.
Everyone signs NDAs.
Yeah. Why don't you kind of give us an intro to kind of your background, how you grew up, maybe your testimony of how you came to be a Christian, and then we can kind of build on that.
Yeah. I was born into a very, as Jordan would say, because I think you say this word more than anyone and I love it, based family, based household. Back in the day when homeschooling was not legislated and approved, and my parents were at the risk of us being taken away from them, homeschooling us, and also marching and petitioning to help that legislation be enacted. So my parents have always been upstream swimmers. They were very march to the beat of their own drum, free thinking, and grew up with a very strong faith heritage. My grandfather was a pastor. My dad had been a pastor, various churches in different capacities, sometimes worship, sometimes youth. They worked in a group home. So between ministry and being very conservative politically, I had a very free thinking, but like critical thinking upbringing. So I like to say I don't think I ever had a choice. I mean, I know I really did. But there has been so much prayer, and there was so much also just generational legacy as well. And I'm not saying I never had my own wander, and I definitely didn't have a great attitude. High school and late teens age, it felt like it had been forced on me that I never really could have yeah, like I wanted to be normal. I think I used to really want to just be regular, and I've always not been, and I will never be normal. And I think I've kind of mostly come to grips with that. And that's a good thing. That's a fine thing. But I think, Summit Ministries is actually it was a agreement for us to move out of the house. We had to go to Summit, and it's a 2-week long biblical worldview summer camp. And they present the 8 major worldview beliefs in all these topics. It's a 2-week long camp that you spend a good deal in a classroom, and then you have activities too. And one of my brothers got away with not going, but all of us, in order to move out, we had to do this. So I arrived en route to New York City. I had just graduated from a junior college and was moving to New York, was going to live with Paul, was, pursuing art. And I had, just been, my first degree was visual arts.
Oh, really?
And was going to kind of pursue styling. I'd been doing a lot of stuff in fashion, and on that travel out, stopped at Summit. And I would say I had a 3-part conversion. There was the heart, the mind, and then the will. And I would say, that when I was freshly 19, that was when my mind was for the first time really convinced, having outside perspective, very intellectual Christians, the apologetics. And I later went on to study with the professor of apologetics. I studied with him at Oxford years down the line. It was just a way to see that there could be intellectually curious, sound-minded Christians that had really good answers. And it wasn't just faith. And I think it's easy to just judge, if this is what Christians are like, then maybe I'm not into this faith. And so I think meeting other like-minded or intellectually curious Christians was a really big part for me. So over time, the will came later of really deciding like, hey, I'm going to follow God for the rest of my life. Not like it's easy and the fun path, but I don't feel like I could unsee the things that I've seen at this point. Sure. And over the course of even the past 10 years, I've seen a lot of supernatural things. I've seen miracles and healings, and I've seen a lot of things that I think a lot of people, maybe they're like, if I saw that, I would believe. But it has been a very wild ride. So journey to faith, it was a little, hey, set up for maybe success or whatever with a legacy, but then had to choose to make it my own. Also.
Okay, so this is right around the time where you were going to college, right? You said that's right around this time. And so
After my first college,
After your first college, okay. And so you moved to New York City. Did you know that you wanted to go to the college that you ended up going to, or was that?
I didn't even know it existed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think my brother, actually, Paul had gone to a dance that they'd had with one of the siblings of our oldest brother who went to Hillsdale. Like they were best friends, and his little sister went to King's. And I didn't even know it existed until Summit Ministries that I mentioned. I ended up working for them and doing fundraising and development for them. And so the summer that, all the summer camps are happening, the professor that I mentioned, I picked him up from the airport like, hey, what's up? And I did not expect the reaction that he gave me, which was, what are you doing here? If I see you here next year, I will not speak to you. Like, you need to go. Do not be like, and no offense to this ministry, obviously, but he's like, you're not stuck here. Like, you need to go out. Yeah. And it really shook me up. I thought he was going to be so happy to see me, and he was not. And then that was actually right when King's announced media, culture, and the arts as a new major. They only had politics, philosophy, economics as a major, kind of borrowed from the Oxbridge tradition, and then business. And so I was like, 2012 was the first graduating class of MCA, media, culture, and the arts. Gotcha. So I was working at Summit, find out about MCA, apply, and move back to New York. Started in the fall.
And so for those of people who don't know about it, so this is the King's College in New York City, which sadly closed its doors. Was it last year? It was last year, right?
Well, I mean, 2023. And I don't know the official status. I think there's like some interim plan. Really? Okay. I don't know all the details. I've kind of not followed it super closely.
Got you. Okay. So you graduated from King's? You were there till you graduated. Okay. And so then you got this degree in media arts and Christian, how to think as a Christian. And then you did what? What did you turn around and do that? Did you go right into doing film and TV stuff? Has that been something you wanted to do, or how did that end up happening?
Yeah, my first degree, my visual arts degree, was 3 years of studio art. I was making art. I was doing ceramics and a lot of fiber arts and fashion design. I helped do a whole line of women's ready to wear with this designer that had just moved from New York. And so I was just making. And why I pursued King's specifically, I saw that I'm not very pro college in general. I think there's specific, really great use cases for it. And I wanted to understand a little bit more the philosophy of why we create and also the intellectual backing, because the medium I ended up pursuing and following, I think film and television is one of the most effective means of igniting an imagination or reinvigorating an imagination. And I wanted to understand what drives us to create and kind of understand the philosophy and sociology of it all. So my time at King's was amazing to be able to study culture, to study postmodernism and think about a lot of these concepts and topics and ideas, but then also be a little bit more introspective. So I kind of was working with my hands and then kind of thinking about why I wanted to do certain projects and what was motivating.
Who are some of the people you were reading at that point that kind of shaped your thinking? I'm curious.
James Davidson Hunter, Jamie Smith, Culture Making, Beauty Will Change the World. Yeah, honestly, Amusing Ourselves to Death, I've just been rereading it. Those are some of the books that just mediated, because, this is 2010 to 2012. This is when Instagram starts. Yep. This is when social media as a phenomenon is happening. So it was such an amazing time to kind of be studying this. And then, obviously social media has become a really big part of almost every single person's life in this country. Yep. So yeah, it was a really great access to a lot of the earlier culture thinkers at that time.
Yeah. So you're reading those guys. And at what point in your studies did you say, all right, I'm going to do film and TV? That's kind of the route that I want to go.
Yeah. So I was babysitting for this family pretty much full time as I was putting myself through college. And I was really there for the education. I wasn't like, oh, this is going to help me get the job. I want to read these books. I want to talk about these things. I want to, understand these concepts and ideas. So I think, and I had a great relationship with the parents, but the mom that I was babysitting for, she kind of introduced me to this woman that she had been hiring to do a kind of redecoration for their home. And she's like, I think you should talk to her, just, knowing that I didn't know what I was going to do. I had really been thinking it was fashion. And then I really realized that was not the industry for me.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was such I was exposed. I didn't know that film and television had such a thing as an art department that did all of the sets, which is, I think, understandable, but I didn't know that working in film and television was even an industry or a career. Yeah. Obviously I had seen movies, but
but you just hadn't thought about the nuts and bolts of it. Yeah.
No, and I wasn't dreaming of film school, but all of a sudden, this woman that she had hired was a prop stylist that had done, Broadway theater and then a lot of broadcast television styling. So she ended up laying it out for me and saying, yeah, there's print, there's film and television, there's live television, and there's theater. And these are all different industries. You can do prop styling, set decoration. And I always had a natural affinity. And I remember leaving, I had met at her office and remember walking down the street in New York City thinking, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm meant to do. I'm for the rest of my life. So I ended up finishing at King's. And instead of saying I didn't know what I wanted to do, it was just, I want to work in film and television and or styling or whatever. And so the opportunities just started. It's not fake it till you make it. It is at some points as well, but it was just, what do you want to do? I want to do this. Okay, well, what about this opportunity? Yeah. So I had a very incredible, just very blessed, one job after another. I incrementally, just had gotten in through connections and network of people that were working in the film. And it's such an organic, as with probably most job, freelance job based too. It's just, if someone likes working with you, they're going to hire you again.
Yeah.
And who would become my mentor, he told me there's 3 things and you need to, and it's you work hard.
Yep.
People like you and you know your shit.
Yeah.
And he said, you only need two to be very successful. If you have all three, you'll be great. And he's like, I know you don't know, you didn't go to film school, you're brand new, but if you work hard and people like you, people will continue to hire you. And it ended up being true. And I think by 24, I had production designed my first movie, my first feature film.
Wow.
And that's when I started lying about my age. And it was, I'm adding years to it.
Yeah.
And it was a really amazing career that I loved so dearly. I loved being on set. I loved every bit of it. I got to travel a ton, work with a ton of people that were very interesting and cool, work on fun projects. I mean, it was a dream come true. And I was just very naturally gifted at it. And so the sad story, the sad ending, not happy ending to this story is, if you're familiar with the Isaac on the altar scenario in the Bible, spoiler alert, Isaac doesn't get killed and God provides a ram to be sacrificed instead. And COVID happens and I pivoted, was directing live streams in New York. And by the time like commercials were back, you're just wearing a mask and it was fine initially. And I had such a deep network that, I'm still getting jobs and back to work, things as normal. And then they changed the legislation in New York. And it was this proof of booster that I would just have had to lie. And I talked to the producer and I knew he was fine with me lying. And I had to be like, but I'm not okay with lying. And I also knew that was burning my entire reputation and
career,
everything I'd built for the past 10 years. And so, in December of 21, Isaac, my proverbial Isaac, was on the altar.
Didn't make it.
And dead. So, but that's actually how I got to working in Bitcoin. At this point, I had already moved to Nashville, was based out of Nashville, had started a meetup. I just knew, hey, when I move, I want to start one, meet local people. Worked great, had lots of friends. And then I was just flying back and forth once or twice a month to New York for a commercial or small shoot. And then all of a sudden, I was severely underemployed. I had been booked out for months and now I have a zero job. And other than, helping run this very overnight sensation, successful Bitcoin meetup, didn't have a lot except the fact that I just moved all my stuff and was there in Nashville. And so Bitcoin Magazine so generously they had a need and a specific role they had been looking for. And then after interviewing with a few people, basically I got hired and then for maybe 2 weeks was doing that role. And then it was, why don't you just do our content, which you're very gifted at. So then I got to help develop, these new shows and make them. So I got to, in a Bitcoin capacity, to be doing more docu-style than narrative film or commercial work, but at least be doing something with storytelling. Cause that's like the through line, whether it's arranging stuff or it's a commercial, it's you're telling a story and what is the story that you're trying to tell? And, I think there was such great synergy for me with there's freedom, there's self-sovereignty, there's a certain level of just independent thinking that Bitcoin in its essence just invites. And so it was really refreshing. And I think in some ways, it was still a very sad death of an entire career, but I got to, in a different way, almost just restart, build a different career.
Yeah. So, man, you've moved to Nashville. You basically start over. And again, your Isaac is dead and the Lord starts providing and, piecemeal other opportunities for you to get to use these same skills, for you to get to, again, without even knowing that you're going to, they kind of moves you into this perfect position. You get to work on, as you mentioned the Hodl Knot trial, your front of camera debut, maybe not debut, but
debut. Yeah.
It's so if people go find your Twitter, that's actually your profile picture is you with your microphone in mic flag. Am I remembering correctly what
mic
it's called?
Flag. There we go. Look at that vocabulary.
So, there we go. So, this is a mic flag for those of you guys who don't know, or it's like the thing that has like the logo of whatever the the company you're working for, or the channel, like that. So Mills, we were recording something for TGFB last year, and Mills had her mic flag sitting around. I was like, what is this? I was like, I would love one of those. And she's like, oh, that's a mic flag. It's from the Hodl Knot trial. The TGFB podcast is brought to you by the TGFB 24 conference. Thank God for Bitcoin 2024 is happening July 24th and 25th in Nashville. This conference brings together some of the best minds in the church, the academy, and in Bitcoin to explore the biblical foundations and daily consequences of how money affects the incentives and outcomes of the world we live in. The name of the conference this year is Render to God, Stewardship, Dominion, and the Economics of Glory. We figured that an election year was the perfect time to examine the relationship between God, government, and money. We'll dive deep into what the Bible has to say about what money is, the role it plays in society, and why the principles governing money creation have such a huge and yet underappreciated effect on every aspect of our world. I'll be speaking alongside pastors and respected Christian figures like C.R. Wiley, Thomas Terry, Eric Hirschman, Glenn Sunshine, and many more. Tickets are limited, so use promo code TGFB24 to save 10% today before prices increase. You can also, for a limited time, if you would like to bring your wife with you, we would love for you to do that. We would love husbands to be able to bring their wives, and so we are offering 80% off tickets for wives who want to accompany their husbands. So that means you can get 2 tickets today for $300 by using promo code COUPLE at checkout at tgfb.com/store. Go ahead, run over and do that. We'd love to have husbands and wives together to talk about these very important topics. This is a one-of-a-kind community experience at the intersection of theology, technology, ethics, finance, and economics. We hope to see you there. Okay, back to the show. I guess this past, after the Bitcoin conference, right? You started just kind of to try to, think about some different opportunities. And what was your initiation to hearing about and beginning to work with PubKey?
I mean, I had done an event with the Redeem GBTC campaign with David Bailey at PubKey in April. That is the first time I'd actually been to PubKey. After leaving New York, I wasn't back very often until they have this awesome vision to really be kind of a Barstool Sports, but for Bitcoin, and creating more along the lines of entertainment for Bitcoiners, but education kind of along the way. And I think there's no offense to the friends that have these podcasts, but there's a ton of very technical Bitcoin podcasts. There aren't a ton of more human interest or just different entry points for people. And so, that was something I have known. I actually knew Andrew from the very first BitDevs in New York that I went to. So he had used to host the meetup during COVID time. So it's just kind of a small Bitcoin world too. So I got to be a part of some of that kind of ideation of what that's going to look like and how that's going to go down. And I mean, if I lived in New York still, ultimately is kind of a tough, in the day of remote work, there are certain jobs that I think are just way better when you're able to be around there and community building. And I highly encourage all New York adjacent people that it's an amazing place for community there.
Yeah. Explain what PubKey is. We're just taking for granted that people know what it is. Why don't you kind of give an intro?
It's a Bitcoin bar in Greenwich Village. And in New York City, it is a regular bar that anyone, Bitcoiner or not, could walk in and could purchase very good food. Honestly, probably the best bar food that I know of in New York. On the money, amazing hot dogs, great smash burger, amazing fries, great bar food and great drinks, cocktails. But you can also pay in Bitcoin.
Let's go.
So they host a lot of, at least once a week, there's a meetup and different topics. Sometimes, once a month it's Lightning, once a month it's mining, but a great place for other Bitcoiners to meet. But also, a great place to bring maybe a friend that isn't a Bitcoiner, but you're just getting a drink at the bar, and you can show them how easy it is theoretically if everything works.
If the stars align. We love you, Lightning. We love you, Lightning devs.
Yeah. But it's a great way to expose in a kind way people to Bitcoin as just a different kind of money. And got to do some 101 programming there with Nifty and kind of talk about what is it? What is Bitcoin? Where does it come from? And how to buy it, how to sell it, how to spend it, how to save it. And I think not that Bitcoin isn't going to succeed, but for it to succeed quickly and well, I just think the more that there is an easy way to understand the basics, because I don't think for anything, if you have to require every single person to understand everything on a very highly technical basis, it's going to be too high of a barrier of entry. And I think Bitcoin development now, the wallets, the apps, the exchanges, it's never been easier truly to buy, I mean, KYC, but to buy Bitcoin. And we should, I think we should welcome people that maybe they're not interested in, they don't need a new social group. They don't need, I mean, Bitcoiners are amazing and, very insightful in different conspiracy theories.
They do. They just don't know that they do.
It's true. But I think PubKey is doing really great work to be able to be a place for regular people. It doesn't all have to be super technical.
Well, first of all, we'll give Nifty a shout. Shout out to Nifty Nay. She is Lisa. She's fantastic. She's does, what is it? Is it BTC Plus is the event, the conference that she's going to be doing in Buenos Aires this year. So I wish we could make it, but we're not going to be able to make it. But Nifty and I met in Greenville, South Carolina for the Ocean Mining Pool launch event. And so I got to hang out with her and Dusty.
She's wonderful.
Shout out to Dusty. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's things in common right there with Thank God for Bitcoin, the mission of PubKey. So they're trying to, again, go out and find this little, in their case, this geographical, niche where people can just come and they can introduce Bitcoin as they're doing something else excellently. But Thank God for Bitcoin, very, very similar. We're not opening up a physical location or bar anytime soon. But, just kind of reaching out to this large community. There's, millions of Christians and just trying to help them see the points of intersection. So that kind of brings us, Mills, full circle to why in the world, of all the things, did you express a desire? We are not a high-dollar Hollywood production, nor are we a high-dollar Bitcoin production. We are a relatively small fish in the grand scheme of things. So what on earth, struck your fancy?
Well, I think with anything, worth doing, okay, well, I have this kind of, I don't know if it's inherent, intrinsic, to my genes or just my upbringing, but excellence. I want to strive to do anything excellently. And I think maybe this is just a little bit of pride, but I feel like Christians should be the best Bitcoiners, because if you do really understand what Bitcoin is and that it's just kind of a money untouched by corruption and hedge of protection against inflation. And that means, hey, we can be a little bit more fiscally responsible, submitting money, obviously unto God. But I feel like we should be the best Bitcoiners. And it sounds like Christian nationalism or something. But there is this part of, I think there's so many things about the Christian faith that just highlight how important money is. And it's where kind of the heart strings are, right? It is this heartbeat of your relationship with money it's pretty emotional. It's pretty central. And I feel like there are so many Christians that I don't think understand the fight we're in. And the thought of, hey, what if this is not just, and I think, Paul's talk at Thank God for Bitcoin a couple of years ago was really life-changing in this way of, this is a technology that could change the world and could bring us together in a big way. And I also just saw that a lot of Bitcoiners who I know and love, but that there's almost like worshiping of Bitcoin instead of worshiping of God. And I want to, together worship God for, obviously Satoshi Nakamoto is not God.
Thank you for clarifying. Yes, we agree.
Has inspired, the singular or plural, the inventors of Bitcoin. I believe that there are a lot of inventions that can be God inspired. And I'm not I don't know for a fact that Bitcoin was inspired by God, but I do know from what the Bible says that when we create and add value and we're to take dominion and we're supposed to really do things well, I think Bitcoin is so in line with Christian values. And I want there to be that freedom of thought and reach out to Christians in that way.
Yeah. And one of the things that when people ask, do you think, I get asked this question probably more than anybody just because of the nature of what I do. But people ask me whether they're Christian or not, ask me, do you think that this is from God? And what I say is, well, if we break this down, every good and perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights. If there's a tool that's a good thing that serves people's needs, truly, that's, again, aligned with the way that God designed the world, well then, yeah, and everyone has to acknowledge on some level that it's a good gift from God. How deeply you think of that, I'm not going to speak for God and something that, but that kind of brings us, again, I'll just say this, I think I've said this and maybe not on the podcast. I don't know if I have said this on the podcast or not, but working with you, again, from basically within a month or so of meeting you, and just kind of seeing and kind of hearing your story and hearing, again, as I mentioned before, just your desire to serve the Lord and to make him known and to, serve in Bitcoin and outside of it. Like, I just was like, man, I would love to like have the resources to be able to hire somebody like Mills, because it'd be fantastic. And it was just like, well, that'll never happen. We're just a little outfit here. And then again, the Lord in his providence, just provides the perfect working of events to make it where it actually, was, possible. So let's do this. You're mentioning, you're coming on to work for Thank God for Bitcoin specifically to help in preparation for the conference. We just announced today what the name of the conference is going to be. It's going to be called TGFB 24 is going to be Render to God. This is after, obviously, one of the most famous passages in the Bible about money. Render to Caesar what's Caesar's and God's what's God's. So render to God, stewardship, dominion, and the economics of glory. So basically, again, we figured it's an election year. We're going to get into this highly contested and controversial relationship between God and politics and money. And so, again, we hear a lot about in the news about God and politics. We've heard terms thrown out about Christian nationalism and, or anti-Christian nationalism and all these different kind of things. And one of the things that we've become convinced of as Bitcoiners and Christians is just there's this hidden role behind that discussion of God and politics is the role of money. It is a hugely underappreciated but vitally, crucially interconnected, just part of this discussion. And so what we want to do is we want to drag that topic kicking and screaming into the light, because what the reality is that what you believe about God and what you believe about money is inherently connected to what you believe about government and what you believe their role is and why they exist and why they might not exist. And so when we're talking about these things, we have to define what is government and what is not government. What are the borders of, what it is, what is licit government, what is illicit? We want to define these things. We don't want to just take for granted that everyone understands, what things are. And so we, as I mentioned this, I think at the conference last year, we live in a world where we've avoided these philosophical and spiritual conversations for so long that we don't really have a unified understanding or a grounded understanding of what things are anymore. We have all this confusion of what is it to be a man? What is it to be a woman? What is government? Why does it exist? There's all kinds of different opinions about that. And again, one of these questions that affects all those other questions is, what is money? And so we want to continue this conversation that we've started, for a number of years. And so as you think about these issues, as you think about preparing the conference and putting together a schedule and doing those things, what are some of the things that are important to you that you really want to make sure are discussed and talked about and put on the table that you feel like maybe isn't being seen the way that by the larger, populace that especially of Christians that they ought to see?
I think it's kind of a twofold thing. One, it is about Bitcoin. And I think that obviously, thank God for Bitcoin. It is about Bitcoin, but it's also so much more about your responsibility in general.
Yeah.
Like as a Christian living in 2024 and in this culture and society. And I really struggle with the gap right now of the understanding of the use case because it's not maybe so painful to you yet.
Yep.
And I think there are a lot of countries where you do not have to explain what Bitcoin's fixing and why they need Bitcoin. But I think because of the privilege and because of the kind of stability that we felt historically in the United States specifically, there is less of an understanding of why it's important for this technology to fix, that there's a certain responsibility that I think Christians need to understand that the money is broken and understand Bitcoin as a tool, as you mentioned. And with all tools, I mean, I'm not saying to worship Bitcoin. That would be so silly. But there are so many things that Bitcoin can make possible. And, with human suffering, with the freedom that Bitcoin can provide to a lot of people in desperate need. And even on a very a small level too, not that missions is small, but Christians should understand this technology in ways that it could also impact spreading of the gospel, like the Great Commission. And it should be kind of something that I think we are at least knowledgeable about. And I don't think there has to be this join the cult, whatever. I think, I don't think that's the goal at all. But I do think Christians should be intellectually engaging with, okay, what's happening with our economy right now? We should understand. And also, having a theological view of money and specifically of government too. Like you mentioned, it's an election year. It's going to be crazy. And it's hard hearing a lot of pastors and churches kind of shy away from talking about politics when I'm not saying they should preach the politics, but it feels like there's a lot of gaps that the faithful believer isn't getting a lot of intellectual discourse to even engage with something. And I'm not saying there's going to be one consistent party line at this conference, but there's going to be some big ideas presented where you can engage with them, hear, some different proposed theories or approaches, but then talk with other like-minded people or not like-minded people and be able to kind of test out some things. I think that's the hardest thing with social media and it kind of being this echo chamber that's very loud for really specific issues, but it's really hard to find a place where you can disagree with trust. And I think this conference will provide an opportunity for ideas to be presented, solutions, alternatives, proposals, sure, but there can be discourse and dialogue and even disagreement within the faith and then, different approaches as well.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I've heard of like a panel discussion or, some sort of maybe like part of a day event or something, but there certainly aren't very many Christian economics conferences. There's certain, conferences where they talk about, these type of issues. There's people who are producing helpful curriculum. There's people who are producing helpful books that help Christians be faithful stewards of their resources. But there's not as much discussion about some of these other issues as far as defining what money is, as far as defining the role of government, talking about these ideas. Whatever you believe about them, they're going to have secondary and tertiary consequences in your life. And so we just want to kind of shine the light and help people to see what are the consequences of using money that's fiat currency, and what is that borne out today? And then what is the process? Where did this process start? How did it happen?
Where is it Christian? Where is it inherently against God?
Yes. Again, that's part of the thing that we want to have is like God does have opinions about these things. Again, is it the most important thing at the end of the day? Is that what God is most concerned with? Certainly not. No. But it does affect Christians' ability to care about and give time to the things that God says that are important. So it really is important.
It's funny, the catchphrase, I don't know if it's still the case, but at Summit was ideas have consequences.
Yeah. Yep.
And the subtitle or the additional double click is big ideas have big consequences.
Absolutely.
And I think it has been a little bit of neglect in general of taking inventory and critical assessment of all the ideas that are maybe culturally and societally accepted. Mm-hmm. But I think in general, as the Western church, just accepted the mainstream view of money instead of the biblical view of money.
Yeah. Well, Mills, thank you so much for your time. Again, this will not be the first time we have you on. You'll be on here plenty more. Especially as the conference gets
It will
closer.
Not be the first time. It wasn't the first time.
You're right. It won't be the last time is what I meant to say. It won't be it was not the first time. It will not be the last time. We know you've got other stuff to do, but yeah, if there's anything else here, just tell people where they can find you. I know you've just confessed that you're not on social media very much, but unless you don't want
Twitter that I reluctantly do tweet every once in a while, but Specific Mills is on Twitter. And the biggest thing that I'm actually doing right now is writing a book on femininity, and it's a humble deconstruction of feminism. So don't necessarily follow me for lots of Bitcoin stuff. But if you're interested in femininity, then absolutely.
Go follow Mills at Specific Mills on Twitter. Again, why don't you explain this for people? You asked me, I laughed when I first heard your Twitter account, and then you're like, oh, you get it? And I was like, I don't think I do. I just thought it sounded funny. So go ahead and explain for people. What is Specific Mills?
General Mills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mills she's a big Lucky Charms fan growing up, so she just wanted to carry that name with her. Anyhow,
No, I'm a big pun. I'm like a dad
Let's go.
humor. I love puns. I think they're so witty. And I actually was going to do not a windmills, but then I didn't want a negative. And I also am a very highly specific person. And so it actually has a good double meaning. And I love
like
a good double meaning.
Well then, Mills, thank you for your time. Again, go follow Mills on Twitter. Tell them your blog so they can follow you over there on your Substack.
Feminine Agency. And it's linked in my Twitter bio and Nostr bio. Same. I'm just Mills on Nostr, though.
Hey, go find us on Nostr. Go listen to Thank God for Nostr, one of our other podcasts. And we will come back and talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, Mills. Our mission at TGFB is to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. We do this through podcasts, books, consulting services, and live events. We love giving away as much of our resources as possible, but we do have real overhead costs. And there are a number of easy ways that you can help us keep the lights on to continue our mission. First, if you're a Bitcoiner, you can listen to the podcast on the Fountain app and stream us sats in real time as you listen to the podcast. Every contribution makes a difference, no matter how small. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/TGFB to receive a number of special benefits available only to our Patreon supporters. If you find these conversations valuable, you can also help spread the word by sharing this episode, subscribing on YouTube, and leaving reviews on Apple and Spotify. Leaving us good reviews goes a long way toward ensuring that the algorithmic powers that be look favorably on our humble endeavors. And finally, engage with us on social media. Join the conversation so that we can build a strong community united around faith, freedom, and sound money. We mentioned the TGFB 24 conference on July 24th and 25th in Nashville. You can go grab your tickets at tgfb.com/store. And finally, go check out julianabarbati.com if you have questions about how to start or better your own podcast. We're grateful for your support, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast.